Hello and welcome. My name is Kim and I'm absolutely thrilled to be over here on Annie's YouTube channel. If you are interested, you can pop on over to my YouTube channel. That's called Annie's Crafter. And of course you can find me on Instagram, but make sure you come and say hi to me in the Annie's Kit Club Facebook groups. You guys just do some absolutely beautiful, brilliant work and you love posting. I love seeing and commenting. We problem solve, we chit chat. It's just a beautiful community to be a part of. So today we're going to be working with the Annie's Holiday Quilters Club, and this month we've got a selection of 4 pot holders. Now the kit comes with all of the fabric included, and you don't have to follow the instructions in the booklet to make the creations, but I always find that as a lifelong avid quilter and crafter that sometimes it's nice to push the easy button. So they've done a wonderful job including in this brochure all the instructions you're going to need to complete the 4 pot holders. Now, with that said, I've come up with 2 different things for this video. The first one is a technique that I don't know if you guys are very familiar with, and it's one that I've used time and time again, and it's wonderful for applique. So I'm going to be showing you that today. I also will be showing you how to take the pot holders and make it absolutely unique, modify it, and make it personalized for your own. Using the instructions, I've already completed the Snowman and the flip-flop pot holders. Now, for the next pot holder that I'll be doing, for the Ladybug hot pad, I wanted to show you a technique that I learned when I was first starting to quilt. Now, I learned how to quilt by hand piecing first, so this was a really instrumental way of trying to figure out how to make all of those seams absolutely perfect. Now, using the included templates, I'm going to go ahead and find the petal that we need, and it's right here. So the next thing you're going to need is no melt template plastic. Now, I've purchased this in my local craft store. You can also find it online on Amazon as well as your local quilt store. Your local quilt store most likely will have it. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a permanent marker, and I don't even need a light box to see this through here. So I'm going to go ahead and trace it with my marker. Now we have to keep in mind that when we're tracing, there are seam allowances involved. When you're tracing it from the pattern onto here, you don't need to worry about the seam allowance. You just need the pattern itself. All right, that's a very rudimentary drawing of the template. Now we're going to go ahead and cut it out and make sure our edges are nice and smooth. So I have prepared my template plastic. I want to just make sure that I cut off all of that permanent ink. You don't want it going onto the fabric itself, and you always want to make sure that you cut the fabric that you're going to be going around the template plastic with at least 1/4 of an inch of a seam allowance. Now this is due to the fact that it's just so much easier for you to shape that fabric around the template when you have a little extra fabric to work with. So now, instead of fusing them as the directions say, I just go ahead and stitch right along the edges of all 4 of the petals, and I use the same technique using this yellow piece for the flower center. I just turned it under and I'll be stitching there as well. So now it's time to attack the ladybug that goes on top of the flower. So the applique technique that they use in the brochure is absolutely just fine. That one works very well. Now there's another technique that I find that works extremely well in this sort of situation. So I've gone ahead and gone to the store and purchased some Pellon mid-weight fusible interfacing. Now this interfacing only has one side. It is bumpy side, that is the glue, and then there's the slick side, and that's the paper side. Now I've gone ahead and used the templates to draw the wings here on the paper side. I'm going to go ahead and take this and put bumpy side down on the right side of the fabric. Now if you want puffy wings, all you have to do is add a scrap piece of batting underneath. Now that I have all 3 layers there, I'm going to go ahead and stitch around each of those circles. Now that you've got your 3 layers sewn together, you're just going to go ahead and take a pair of very sharp scissors, and you're going to just pierce that interfacing. You're not going to go and cut the fabric at all. because that would not be good. I'm also going to take the same pair of scissors and I'm going to cut pretty close to the edge, leaving between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch seam allowance around each of the wings. Now that we've got our interfacing sewn on there and the slit cut and them trimmed, you just want to make sure that you turn them right side out. Now by doing this, they turn into wings like this, and the fusible part of the interfacing comes on the bottom of each of the wings. If it's tricky, you can slip more. I always find that it's just fine to do a little bit of fiddling and it works out great in the long run. If you're having trouble getting some of the points, you can always use a bone folder to push through the fabric and the interfacing and make sure you have a nice, clean, and smooth edge. A lot of you are probably wondering, how do I use all of these templates within the Annie's kit? Well, you can use number 1, you can cut them out and save them and attach them back to the project so you can keep them for future use. You could also use a light box, like this light box, where you can layer the templates and then the fabric on top and do your tracing with your water-soluble marker. But if you have a darker fabric like what we're going to be dealing with, you can't use this method. So to use this method, all you need to do is get a piece of sidewalk chalk and go ahead and trace on top of the line in which the template is on the paper. Once you have that traced, go ahead and grab your fabric that you're wanting to use. I've got this black with some fusible web on the back. I'm going to go ahead and take it and push it down into the chalk and flip it over, and you have the impression of the body of the ladybug. Now that I've gotten the wings and the body fused on the flower, there's just a couple more finishing steps. I need to put these ladybug buttons on the wings. I need to put the tendrils here, also in the flowers, and finish off the binding. When I'm putting my binding on or sewing all 4 of the layers together in either a top stitch, I always like to put on my walking foot. This is one of those specialty foots that are either included in your sewing machine purchase or it can be purchased separately. It really does make a difference, so the top and the bottom and all of the layers in between don't get shifted as you're putting on your binding. So I've gotten to the corner of the binding. I stopped 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. I'm going to go ahead and put my needle up, presser foot up, and I'm going to take out my fabric. I'm not going to cut the threads because that seems like a waste of time. I'm going to go up at a 45-degree angle and then back down so it's nice and square. Then rotate my pot holder in 90 degrees, insert it back in at 1/4 of an inch away from the edge as per the instructions, and then I start sewing. So I have my binding all the way around my pot holder, and I'm just going to put my finger in and fold over the binding, flip over the pot holder, and then my best suggestion for binding is I always pin it and hand sew it. I always find that I get the best results doing a whip stitched all the way around instead of trying to stitch in the ditch through both of the layers back again. So you get to the corner, you just want to make sure it's nice and flat. Turn it over, and you'll see that I have a perfectly mitered corner on both sides of the pot holder. Isn't that a perfect way to do binding? Now I'm just going to go ahead and finish up the rest of the pot holder. So I'm just about to start the pumpkin hot pad, and I've got a few of the elements already cut out. And I did use the chalk method to get the stem transferred from the template sheet that was provided onto the fabric. So you can tell by the template here that if you use the chalk side and you flip it over, it's a mirror image. And now it looks like Annie's also used the same technique to transfer over to the stem over here. So if you're wanting to recreate this pumpkin exactly like this, what you want to do is flip over the template and use the chalk on the back side. Now you can either use a light box or a window to find that line to trace. That way you get the exact mirror image of this pumpkin, and your pot holder will look exactly like that. Now that I have all those pieces cut out, I was thinking about how I could personalize this, how I could make this special for different seasons. I went ahead and did some thinking and noodling, and I thought, well, why couldn't I make this pumpkin into a jack-o'-lantern? And all this is just a curve with the cutouts of the teeth, and then 2 triangles as the eyeballs. But you can always change up the face and do all sorts of different types of eyes to suit what your interests are. Now for this pumpkin, I chose a different route. What I've done here is use some of the extra scrap fabric from the kit. And I will have to say I've used only just all of the fabric that came in the kit. I haven't used any extra or additional, and there was plenty to do some of these modifications in the pattern. Now all I've done is cut these shapes freehand. Now if you don't feel comfortable doing those shapes freehand, here's a suggestion. I went on to Google Images and I found a cornucopia coloring page where I kind of could do either the transfer method onto the fabric, or I could just eyeball it and say, okay, there's leaves, there's pumpkins, there's corn, there's apples. And that is how I came up with my cornucopia of a pumpkin. And because this is a pot holder and not an award-winning quilt, I'm just going ahead and using the fusible method. So I've got fusible web on the back of all of these pieces. I'm just going to go ahead and take the paper off. So let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to do some finishing on these 2 pot holders. Now, of course, for the face for the jack-o'-lantern, I'm going to be using black thread all the way around. You could always do a little bit of contrasting thread if you wanted to. They do make glow-in-the-dark thread now, so that would be a fun addition, especially if you wanted to quilt the outside edge. But for that, I'm just going to be using black thread and then brown thread, and then I'm going to be using gold thread around the pumpkin. Now that brings me to the point of how do you stitch on the appliques where there's multiple colors? Now, of course, if this was an award-winning quilt that I wanted to put into a show, I would most definitely switch up the fabric thread for each of the items on here. But because this is simply a pot holder and everything should look cohesive, I'm going to be using this gold thread. So I have all of my pieces appliqued on, and I also did the exterior stitching, and I got all of the 4 layers all together and top stitch. Now, as the instructions show and say, you're supposed to quilt through the whole thing to make it puffy, to make the pumpkin more real. Now what I've done is take my Annie's water-soluble marker and just drew where I thought maybe the lines for the dimension of the pumpkin can go, but I also added a few extra tendrils here. And when you're stitching through all of them, what you want to just do to have one continuous motion, you could just go down this side and back up with your free motion quilting, and then come back down here and back up. So it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but even drawn like this, I'm really excited about what it's going to look like when I do the free motion quilting on this. So just make sure you've got your free motion quilting open-toed foot and you've dropped your feed dogs, and I've got the same gold thread that I used previously. I'm going to go ahead and start stitching. I like to stay in place for just a couple of stitches just to lock it in, and then I'm free to just go ahead and enjoy the joy of free motion quilting. Now, if you're worried about having consistent stitches, I would highly suggest lowering the speed of the maximum if you have that capability on your sewing machine. It makes you stay really consistent, and the slower you go, the better results you'll get. And then to finish up, I always just again lock it into place with a couple stitches and then go ahead and cut my thread. So for the next pot holder modification, I thought this snowman is absolutely adorable. I would love to make him a mate. So I decided to come up with a concept of making a Mrs. Snowman. Now I'm using the same dimensions for the Mrs. Snowman as for the Mrs. The only modification I did make in the shape is because I thought she should have a stocking cap made out of some of the extra blue fabric. And for her scarf, I used some of the extra from the flip-flop pot holder. Now I'm going to go ahead and get these guys situated. And of course, because the pot holder, like the gentleman, the lady is the same. It is 3 strips. And so I just have 2 of each. Now for this white fabric, you want to make sure that you are working with the right side versus the wrong side, because the pattern is just so minute and hard to see on here. I sometimes like to use my fabric marking pen. That way I can always just make a quick mark on the right side of the fabric, and that way I don't have to keep looking at it under the light when I'm at my sewing station. And there she is. I'm just going to take a spritz of my iron and just wet it down in the parts where I have the blue marking pen, and then I'm going to keep continuing on with the project. So I finished the lady snowman just as per the directions, but instead of the hat brim like the gentleman here has its square corners, I shortened it by 1 inch and made it round corners so it would add a little bit of touch of femininity. I did put her bow down here. I tried to make one little swath of the same colored fabric to not have quite so much busy. And for the hat brim as well, do you see how I cut this piece of fabric from the flip-flops horizontally, but to add some actual visual interest, I decided to cut this one vertically. Now, to personalize it just a little bit more, to add a little touch of girl, I decided to make a flower that was the same flower that you can see in the flip-flop. So instead of putting that line down the center, which I think adds a lot of detail, I just went ahead and joined it together in the center. But now I've pulled some buttons from my button stash, and I was going to kind of decide how I want the flower to look and to what colors really would look best. So I'm just previewing a couple of them, and then I will decide which one I like the most. I'm really into either this big pink one, which the colors don't actually are in the fabric, but I just love how big and poppy it is, or I like this also. I think I'm going to go ahead and pick the pink one. It has a little bit of a velvet texture and it's just so cute. I'm so happy on the way this is turning out. All finished and sewn on. The only difference I made between the snowman and the snow girl is I did not go all the way through with the buttons for the eyes. I'm going to go ahead and correct that off camera, but oh my gosh, I am in love with the pair of these guys. They are so adorable. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed putting all of these holiday hot pads together for you and showing you all of the different techniques that I've come across the way in my quilting journey. I think most of them turned out super cute, and of course you can always add or subtract embellishments as you choose. And just so you know, I didn't add any hanging loops to any of these hot pads because I thought they would be multi-use things. Yes, I did use Insul Bright, which is for hot pad insulating batting, but I always thought there would be a wonderful decoration onto my bulletin board here in my craft room. So if you guys are interested in picking up the Annie's Quilters Club subscription, there's of course a link down below that will get you all set up with that subscription. There might even be a coupon code. Next time, I hope to see you again here on Annie's channel, and of course over on my channel too, with some wonderful inspiration from Annie's. Thank you so much and have a fantastic day.